Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Levine. I am an English major in the English department, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about Lady Gaga's Judas, Redefining Good and Evil. The objective of this presentation is kind of to understand how Gaga is conforming to our common ideas of the Bible, but also undermining them at the same time, thus allowing herself to create a space for us to understand our flawed perspective on the binaries of good and evil, as she attempts to emphasize the subjectivity of the two spaces. She does this as she uses biblically historical context and a cultural context as well. Contemporary cultural context, to be exact. So examining it from a historical perspective, Mary Magdalene was an incredibly devout Christian follower, incredibly devout to Jesus. She was a very important apostolic leader. However, these kind of more benevolent aspects of her character tend to be overshadowed by the idea that she was a prostitute, which is an incredibly immoral occupation for a Christian to have, operating within that Christian sphere. However, it should be noted that the idea of her being a prostitute or repentant or otherwise has really no basis in the historical tradition and kind of arises from the patriarchal power structures that subject and shape identities based on gendered ideologies that constrain and diminish the female authority and autonomy. So, historically speaking, Magdalene's role is not as monstrous as we typically believe, not as lacking virtue as we commonly believe. But this kind of dichotomy does create that rift between what we see as good and evil, good being this virtuous, unattainable ideal of the feminine, while evil is that true anxiety of a threatening power to the patriarchal structure. Magdalene, being a very independent and strong woman, threatens that in a way. And so we label her as prostitute to kind of pigeonhole her into this space where she is controllable. Judas, on the other hand, is operating a bit differently. Typically, Judas would embody sin and evil for both the historical and biblical tradition. He was the man who betrayed Jesus, turning him into the policing authorities for an exchange of 30 pieces of silver, and thus leading to Jesus' death and crucifixion. This quote from Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy notes that Jesus was in the ninth and final circle of hell, wherein he suffered with those most vile and malicious betrayers. So he's kind of there suffering throughout all of eternity, which kind of gives us an idea of how the public viewed him historically and contemporarily. However, Judas is a very interesting character to examine in the conversation of good and evil, as Judas did embody those really malevolent ideals, turning Jesus in, that betrayal. However, he really does try to redeem himself. He feels immense guilt, remorse, and returns those 30 pieces of silver and inevitably kills himself by hanging. We see this internal struggle that Judas feels, and even here in this photo that you see Satan pulling out this evil body from Judas's more benevolent body, kind of dealing with this idea that they operate within the same sphere. You can't have one without the other. Evil and good, they work in tandem. So looking at Cohen's monster theory, I think this is an important theory to address. The monster's body is a cultural body, emphasizes that monsters are born from a certain cultural moment, this crossroads of a cultural moment, and the monster is pure culture, embodying those fears, desires, anxieties, and even fantasies from the cultures which they arose. Mary Magdalene and Judas are great examples of these, as Mary Magdalene kind of embodies those fears of having a powerful and independent woman who threatens those patriarchal structures that kind of prop up our society, while Judas is the anxiety that we always deal with in the struggle between good and evil that lies within ourselves. Another really great another great person to examine as we talk about this Cohen monster theory, the monster's body is a cultural body, would be Lady Gaga. Her pop culture identity is extremely rooted in liminality. Lady Gaga lives on this border between normal and abnormal. She pushes back on anything that would be deemed as culturally acceptable and kind of tries to find that space of weird wherein she kind of thrives. And she additionally encourages her audience to do the same. Here we have the infamous meat dress, which she wore at the Music Video Awards so many years ago. And she was really scorned for this. She had a lot of pushback from the media, from our society, and we just saw it as being a really weird statement. However, we tend to ignore her societal commentary. She was protesting military do not ask, do not tell policy, which infringed on the rights of the LGBTQ community in military service, and also served as kind of a voice against the objectification of women's bodies. They're not just pieces of meat, they're people. So this is a really important statement that we often overlooked, and it's an example of Gaga's image being dismissed as weird when there's often a large statement behind such a weird social atrocity in a way. And she does the same thing with this song, Judas. I would also like to note that Lady Gaga has a very deeply religious background. She was raised Catholic, she's very devout, often prays. Whoever works with her on music video sets and in recording sessions notes that she prays often. She's very tied to her religion, which will come through a lot later as we talk about the lyrical analysis in the music video of Judas. Judas, the song, was released on the album Born This Way in 2011. This album also featured songs like Edge of Glory and Born This Way. And while Gaga has a tendency to incorporate a lot of religious undertones within her songs, Judas is unignorable and overt in the religious overtones that it kind of incorporates, and it has been said to be the most religious of her songs. So let's take a deep dive on that analysis. Lyrically speaking, Lady Gaga employs a lot of biblical allusions throughout her songs. These lyrics that you'll see here all reference the four canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All of these lyrics really center the song around Jesus' crucifixion, kind of allowing us to see how this dichotomy of good and evil works, especially in regards to the characters of Judas and Mary Magdalene, who are incredibly prominent figures within the song. Additionally, these lyrics kind of serve to support Gaga's message. These lyrics ensure that her song isn't necessarily interpreted from a place of comedic parody, but rather a place of serious social analysis, wherein she's taking these biblical verses from these canonized gospels and she's turning them into something that we can understand in our contemporary culture. And it's really impressive how she weaves these seamlessly into her songs and is able to kind of incorporate these important biblical messages, as she also kind of tends to rewrite them. Lady Gaga's lyrics also deal with a lot of double entendre. It is commonly thought that the song Judas features two different perspectives, one being Mary Magdalene and one being Judas. This first lyric that you'll see here is commonly thought to be sung by Judas as we break into the pre-chorus. The octave drops a notch and the tone kind of shifts, and we see Judas kind of speaking about how much he wants to portray Jesus. I'll bring him down, down, a king with no crown, king with no crown. Judas is kind of emphasizing that he doesn't necessarily see Jesus as a very kingly figure, and in turn wants to bring him down, down, down. That betrayal of 3 times is also emphasized in some of the earlier canonized Gospels, with Simon Peter betraying Jesus 3 times before the cock crows. That second lyric that you'll see, Jesus is my virtue and Judas is the demon I cling to, is shifting back to Mary Magdalene's perspective. This lyric, insinuates the dichotomy that we have between the good and evil desires that we often deal with. Mary Magdalene is clinging on to that virtue of Jesus, but also clinging on to that demon of Judas, that evil aspect that she can't really seem to get away from. And I feel like it's a very relatable line. Innately, as humans, the good and bad is just a binary that we can't escape. Those two things work in mutualism together, and I think this lyric does a really good job of explaining that. So the music video, it's 5 minutes and 35 seconds long. It focuses on the 3 primary figures, Mary Magdalene, Judas of Iscariot, and Jesus. Mary Magdalene being played by Lady Gaga, Judas of Iscariot being played by Norman Reedus, and Jesus being played by Rick Gonzalez. The intro to this music video, very interestingly, really emphasizes Lady Gaga taking a contemporary spin on the biblical tropes. Instead of the 12 disciples, we have 12 members in a motorcycle gang. They all have their respective disciples' name written on the back of their jackets. You can kind of see it in that picture, but not as clearly. And they're all following the modern Jesus, who's riding at the front, wearing a crown of thorns, and Mary Magdalene sits on the bike with him. However, it should be noted that Mary Magdalene, while clutching on to Jesus's waist, is constantly looking towards Norman Reedus, who plays Judas, which is kind of reaffirming and re-alluding to that idea that Mary Magdalene is constantly grappling with that dichotomy of good and evil. She can't really get past letting go of that evil, as she holds on to her good virtue. The music video setting is mainly taking place in what Lady Gaga would deem as the Electric Chapel, which is her adaptation of Mount Zion, which is where the apostles gather to listen to Jesus' teachings, and also where the Last Supper is supposed to be held. The Electric Chapel is a very interesting place, for it kind of takes a new spin on what we would deem as being good, or of what we would deem as necessarily good or bad. The actions that you'll see in the music video in this Electric Chapel are not necessarily as pious as one would expect an adaptation of Mount Zion to be, as there is same-sex relations in the background, a lot of violence, drinking, and drugs. Lady Gaga is taking this typically very benevolent space and kind of transforming it into a space that kind of fits her own agenda, that encapsulates what she stands for as a pop culture icon, which is that transgression of cultural norms. One of the climaxes of this music video is when Mary Magdalene shoots Judas with a golden gun. This is kind of insinuating that Mary Magdalene is acting as a protective force over Judas within her feminine sphere, as this gun, rather than bullets, shoots lipstick. I think it's very important that we see Mary Magdalene protecting Judas, as in the Bible, it's often the other way around, Jesus protecting Mary Magdalene. It's also important that this gun shoots lipstick rather than bullets, because it's really emphasizing Magdalene's feminine sphere. And it additionally emphasizes that Mary Magdalene can't quite come to kill Judas, despite how much she might want to. She's unable to entirely eliminate that evil from her life, as it is ingrained within her, as it is within all of us. This scene, Mary Magdalene and the Birth of Venus, this Birth of Venus is a painting by Sandro Botticelli, and this is a very interesting scene. It kind of happens during the bridge of the song, and Mary Magdalene's character is hit by a wave. The Birth of Venus and this scene would typically assume or insinuate that water is being a very purifying and good source. However, we kind of see this wave knock down Mary Magdalene's character at the end, and she's consumed by this water. The waves rush over her and you can't see her anymore. She's somewhat drowned. So it kind of becomes more of a destructive rebirth, like the water that you typically hear of in Noah's Ark. It ensures that purification comes into play, insinuating that there's something to be purified, that Mary Magdalene's character is not entirely good and is needing of that purifying rebirth. Very interesting. She's ultimately scourged in the end. Washing of the feet, this scene cuts back and forth with the wave scenes. This scene is important to note because typically, biblically speaking, washing the feet is a cleansing renewal. It's a holy ritual that typically only the benevolent receive. However, in this scene, we have Mary Magdalene washing both the feet of Jesus and Judas, both the feet of the good and the bad. This insinuates that good and evil are equally deserving of such humility, and that humility should be extended to all rather than just good. And it also seems less of a space of penitence, but more of a space of allowing oneself to deal with the dichotomy between good and bad, allowing those two good and bad forces to come together rather than being a penitence of bad to the good. At the end of the music video, Mary Magdalene's character is stoned by an onlooking crowd. I think this is a very important scene as Mary Magdalene bears this brunt alone. Nobody comes to save her. There are scenes within the Bible wherein Judas steps in and saves the condemnation of the woman. However, this does not happen in this music video. Here, Mary Magdalene is not an adulteress who needs to be saved, but rather a strong woman who bears the brunt of her pain alone. It is creating the image of a powerful woman as an anxiety, something that needs to be destroyed, as she is stoned. Lady Gaga's song and music video received a lot of rejection. It was often scorned by many religious communities and the media. They did not approve of what Lady Gaga was doing. However, I think that the comments and the backlash that she did receive is very telling of the entirety of what Lady Gaga's message is. These monstrous ideologies of our society are often undeserving of such a reception, but within their transgression of certain social and moral norms, they are threatening and create anxiety and are thus deemed evil, monstrous, or lacking virtue. This reception and backlash and scorn mirrors a lot of what we see within the characters of Mary Magdalene, Judas, and even Lady Gaga herself, receiving scorn for something that is so undeserving. So Lady Gaga and Judas, they operate within the same sphere, as the topics that Gaga approaches also have a tendency to be hastily categorized as abnormal, and they do not consciously fit into specific good ideas of society. These hasty assumptions disallow the nature of humans to be fully understood, and that idea of good and evil operate in a simultaneous or mutualistic relationship with each other. With one, you are always promised the other. Lady Gaga's message. Lady Gaga once made a statement that Judas was had a very metaphorical and dualistic meaning about forgiveness and betrayal and the things that happen to you in your life. Within us, there is all good and evil, and it is unfair to condemn people or one person for such actions when they are so undeserving. Through Mary Magdalene, Gaga presents us with both the idea that evil and good operate in the same sphere, but also that we tend to categorize things that appear threatening to us as evil, since we fear it unconsciously. These things threaten our social standards, our social structures, and we condemn them for that. Judas's character asks the audience to rethink how the relationship of good and evil operate together and how they function together. Rather than asking society to label good and evil outright, we should look subjectively at the two terms and acknowledge the dualism of the two, and that it's innately human for us to battle with this internal struggle between good and evil. Rather than labeling somebody sinful for something, we should just understand that they're human. And I think Lady Gaga does a really great job of getting that message across through her song Judas. So my conclusion. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation on the representation of the duality that lies within the conversation of good and evil throughout Lady Gaga's Judas. Please feel free to reach out with any questions, comments, or concerns. My email is down below. And here's my works cited. Thank you so much.